Amara had always dreamed of flying. From the time she was a little girl, she would look up at the sky and imagine herself soaring among the clouds. Every time she heard a plane above, she would stop whatever she was doing and smile, imagining one day she would be in that cockpit, flying the plane herself. But today was different. Today, she wasn't flying. She was simply traveling. Amara was a quiet, smart girl who had been raised by her grandmother, who loved her dearly. Grandma was always telling her, "You'll go far, Amara. One day, you'll make us both proud." But for now, Amara was only traveling across the ocean to meet her mother, who had been living overseas for years. It was her mother's dream to send Amara to school in a better place, but Amara had missed her more than words could say. She hadn't seen her in years, and now, at 17, she was finally going to be reunited with her. She had never flown alone before, and as she stood in line at the airport, her heart pounded in her chest. She clutched her passport tightly, her only ticket to freedom. She'd heard that flying could be stressful, especially when you were alone, but she was determined to make it. The airport was busy, filled with families, businessmen, and tourists. But Amara felt alone in the sea of faces. She stood quietly, her head down, trying not to draw attention to herself. She had always felt out of place, especially with her dark skin and curly hair. She was used to people looking at her strangely, making her feel different. When it was her turn at the counter, she stepped forward nervously, placing her passport on the desk. The flight attendant, a woman in her 30s with sharp eyes, looked at her, then at the passport. The attendant's expression changed. She didn't smile. Instead, her brow furrowed slightly as she flipped through the pages quickly. Amara noticed the woman's gaze narrowing as she looked back at her. "Is everything okay?" Amara asked, her voice trembling slightly. The attendant didn't respond. She just kept flipping through the passport. Finally, she closed it with a snap, the sound too loud for such a small moment. She looked up at Amara with cold eyes. "This is fake," the attendant said firmly. Amara's heart skipped a beat. "No, it's not. That's my passport." The attendant shook her head, not even looking at her. "I'm sorry, but this passport is fake. You're not flying today." Amara's breath caught in her throat. She could feel eyes on her, the murmurs of the crowd growing louder. People were starting to notice the scene. "I swear, it's real," Amara said, her voice rising in panic. "I'm just trying to go meet my mom." The attendant didn't respond. She pushed the passport aside and picked up the phone. "I'm going to call security." Amara's hands shook as she looked around at the people staring. Some looked at her with judgment. A few whispered to each other, pointing. She felt her face burn with embarrassment. Why was everyone looking at her like that? Then, a man in a dark blue uniform walked by. He was tall, his face serious, and his footsteps echoing through the terminal. He must have been a higher-ranking officer because people moved out of his way quickly. Amara noticed the attendant's eyes flick to the man, and she suddenly stood straighter, her voice softer as she spoke into the phone. "Please come here. We need assistance," the attendant said quickly. Amara's chest tightened. She couldn't believe this was happening. She didn't understand what was going on. Why was her passport being treated like it was a fake? She had everything in order. She had been looking forward to this trip for so long. How could they do this to her? Then, the man in the uniform stopped right behind her. He had a stern face, but there was something about the way he looked at her that made her feel like he wasn't going to judge her. The attendant gestured to Amara and said, "This girl is trying to use a fake passport. We need to stop her from boarding." The man's eyes met Amara's for a long moment. Then, without warning, he stepped forward, took the passport from the counter, and looked at it carefully. Amara's hands shook as she waited for him to say something. She was so afraid. What if she was stuck here? What if they didn't let her go? She couldn't stop thinking about her mom waiting for her. The man slowly looked up, and his voice broke the tense silence. "Who gave you this fake passport?" Amara felt her heart drop. "It's not fake," she shouted, tears welling in her eyes. "It's real. I swear, I didn't do anything wrong." The man continued to stare at her for a moment, and then he turned slowly, his face softening. "That's my daughter," he said, his voice calm but firm. Amara froze. The words hung in the air for a moment, and the room seemed to stop moving. The flight attendant's face went pale. She took a step back. "Your daughter," she whispered. The man nodded, and with one simple gesture, he handed Amara her passport back. "Go ahead," he said, his voice gentle but commanding. "She's flying today." And just like that, everything changed. Amara stood frozen in disbelief. The flight attendant, her face still pale, stared at the man in uniform, utterly stunned. The passengers who had been watching the scene unfold murmured in surprise. Amara slowly reached for her passport, her fingers trembling, still trying to process what had just happened. The man who had stepped in, who had saved her, looked at her with kind eyes, as if nothing was out of the ordinary. For a moment, it felt like the entire airport had disappeared. Amara was alone with this stranger, someone who had just turned her worst nightmare into a distant memory. She wanted to say something, to thank him, but words caught in her throat. "Thank you," she whispered, barely able to speak. The man nodded, his voice low but reassuring. "It's nothing. Just glad to help." But Amara could tell this wasn't just about helping. There was something deeper in his eyes, something that made her feel like there was more to him than met the eye. His stern expression softened slightly, and he gave a small, almost imperceptible smile. But before she could ask anything, he spoke again, this time more seriously. "Are you traveling alone?" he asked, his gaze now scanning the area, as though making sure no one was still watching them. "Yes. Well, I'm on my way to meet my mom," Amara replied, still unsure what to make of this strange encounter. "Your mother?" The man seemed to pause, as though his mind was processing this new information. He didn't respond right away, but continued to watch her carefully, as if making sure she was all right. Amara felt a sudden knot in her stomach. She had always felt awkward talking about her mother. Her mom had left for a new life when Amara was just a child. She hadn't heard from her much, only sporadic letters and an occasional phone call. It wasn't the reunion she had imagined all these years, but it was still something she was looking forward to. This was supposed to be a new beginning. "Yes, she lives in London," Amara added, looking down at the floor, avoiding the man's piercing gaze. The man stood silently for a few moments before speaking again. "London. That's where my old colleague used to work." Amara looked up, puzzled. "Your colleague?" He gave a slight nod. "Yes, I used to fly with a woman named Claire. Your mother's name wouldn't happen to be Claire, would it?" Amara's heart skipped a beat. She blinked, shocked by the coincidence. She didn't know why, but a feeling of dread washed over her. Her mother's name was Claire. Amara's heart raced as she tried to process what was being said. "You knew my mom?" Amara asked, her voice barely above a whisper. It felt unreal. The man's expression changed, becoming more serious. "I knew her well, actually. We were both pilots back in the day. We worked together. But something happened, something no one really talks about." Amara's hands clenched around her passport. "What happened?" The man hesitated, his eyes scanning the room once more. The flight attendant had already moved away, talking nervously to her colleague at the counter. The other passengers were too distracted with their own things to notice the conversation unfolding. "She disappeared during a flight," he said quietly, his voice tinged with sadness. "It was years ago. We lost contact after that." Amara felt a cold shiver run down her spine. Her mother had disappeared. That was news to her. All these years, she had believed her mother had simply chosen a different life for herself, leaving her behind. But now, hearing this man speak of her mother's disappearance, as if it were a mystery, Amara felt like the world was shifting beneath her feet. "Disappeared," she repeated, her voice trembling. How? The man's face grew even more somber. It was a flight to a remote area. She was part of a team bringing supplies to an international organization. They were in a dangerous zone. The plane disappeared off radar, and they never found it. We don't know what happened. Some think it was an accident, but others. He paused, as if weighing his words carefully. Others believe it was something more. Amara's mind spun. She had never been told any of this. All these years, she had lived with the belief that her mother had simply walked away. She had been angry at her, at the way her mother had abandoned her without any real explanation. But now everything was different. "I don't understand," Amara whispered, her hands trembling. "Why didn't anyone tell me?" The man sighed deeply, as if the weight of the past was heavy on his shoulders. "I'm sorry you had to find out this way. But your mother was an amazing woman, Amara. She was brave, talented, and she believed in making a difference. Her disappearance wasn't something anyone was proud of. It was swept under the rug for a reason." Amara felt a rush of emotions. Anger, confusion, and something else. Something that felt like a deep ache. She had missed her mother so much, but now, hearing that her mother had been part of something dangerous, something larger than herself, made Amara feel small and insignificant. Why hadn't her mom told her the truth? "I want to know more," Amara said quietly, her voice filled with determination. "I need to know the truth." The man studied her for a moment, his face softening. "I'll help you, Amara. I promise." Amara sat in a small cafe at the airport, her passport now safely back in her bag. She was no longer thinking about the flight or the excitement of finally seeing her mother. All she could think about was the man in the uniform, the one who had saved her from humiliation, and the shocking revelation he had just shared. Her mind couldn't focus on anything else. Her world had been turned upside down in just a few minutes. The man, who had introduced himself as Captain Andrew Miller, sat across from her, his gaze serious and steady. He had told her he knew her mother from their days as pilots, working together in some of the most dangerous parts of the world. He had mentioned something about an accident, a plane crash that had occurred years ago. But something about the way he had spoken to her felt different. There was a heaviness in his eyes, a sadness that spoke of untold stories. It was clear he wasn't just another stranger. He had known her mother, and perhaps more than that. But what had he meant by "some believe it was something more"? Amara couldn't keep her questions bottled up anymore. Her heart was pounding, and her mind was racing. She needed answers. "Captain Miller, I have to know more," Amara said, her voice barely above a whisper. "What happened to my mother? What do you mean when you say some believe it was something more?" Captain Miller took a long breath, looking down at his cup of coffee, as if trying to decide how much to share. For a moment, the world around them felt distant, as if the noise of the airport had faded into the background. It was just the two of them now, in a small corner of the bustling terminal, facing the past they had both tried to forget. "She didn't just disappear, Amara," he said quietly, his voice low. "Her plane didn't crash by accident. The flight she was on was part of a larger operation, one that wasn't exactly legal. There were powerful people involved, people who didn't want her to complete that mission." Amara's stomach twisted. "What do you mean? What kind of operation?" Captain Miller looked over his shoulder, making sure no one was listening. The tension in the air was thick, and Amara could tell that this wasn't something he shared lightly. "I can't go into too many details. It's a complicated situation. But your mother, Claire, she was a part of a group working to expose corruption in high places. She was doing something important, something dangerous." Amara felt like the ground was shifting beneath her. Her mother, who had always seemed like a distant figure, someone who had left her behind for a new life, had been involved in something big, something dangerous, something that might have cost her everything. "She was a whistleblower?" Amara asked, barely able to process the words. Captain Miller nodded slowly. "Yes, in a way. She had information about some very powerful people, people who didn't want that information getting out. She was working on gathering evidence for a case that could bring down some influential figures. The flight she was on. It was supposed to be a cover-up. They made it look like an accident. But I'm telling you, Amara, it wasn't. They knew what they were doing. And they knew how to make it look like nothing more than a tragedy. A chill ran down Amara's spine. She had always felt there was more to her mother's story. But this was something she had never imagined in her wildest dreams. Her mother had been part of something so dangerous, and Amara hadn't known a thing about it. But why didn't she tell me? Amara asked, tears threatening to spill from her eyes. Why didn't she tell me what she was really doing? All these years, I thought she just didn't want me. I thought she didn't care. Captain Miller's eyes softened with understanding. She loved you, Amara, but she was protecting you. She couldn't tell you everything. You were just a child back then, and she didn't want you to get caught up in this. She thought she was keeping you safe by staying away, by keeping you out of it. But she never stopped thinking about you. Amara felt her chest tighten. The anger she had carried with her for years, anger at her mother for leaving her, for choosing a new life over her, started to melt away. In its place, a deep sense of loss filled the empty space. Her mother hadn't abandoned her. She had been forced to make the hardest decision of her life. She had been fighting a battle far bigger than anything Amara had ever understood. She thought she was protecting me, Amara whispered, her voice shaky. But now she's gone. And I don't even know what happened to her. Captain Miller nodded gravely. We don't know for sure, Amara. The official story is that her plane crashed. But I have my doubts. We never found the wreckage. No bodies. Just nothing. It's like she disappeared from the face of the earth. Amara's hands gripped the edge of the table, her mind spinning. So, you think she's still alive? Captain Miller hesitated, his expression hard to read. I don't know, Amara, but I want to help you find out the truth. If your mother is still out there, we'll find her. Together. Amara felt a flicker of hope, something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. For so long, she had lived with the pain of not knowing why her mother had left. But now, she had a chance to uncover the truth, to understand the mystery of her mother's disappearance. Where do we start? Amara asked, her voice filled with determination. We start by looking at the people who were behind that operation, Captain Miller said, his tone steady. We dig into the past, we follow the clues, and we uncover the truth. It's not going to be easy, but I promise you, Amara, we'll get there. We'll find your mother. Amara nodded, her heart racing. The journey she thought was just about meeting her mother had turned into something far bigger. But now, with Captain Miller by her side, she felt like she could take on whatever came next. The days that followed felt like a blur to Amara. The excitement of her first flight and the dream of reuniting with her mother had quickly turned into a whirlwind of questions, fear, and uncertainty. Captain Miller's words echoed in her mind constantly. We'll find your mother. We'll uncover the truth. But with each passing day, the weight of his promise grew heavier. What if they didn't find her? What if her mother was gone for good? She met Captain Miller a few more times in the weeks after their first meeting, each time in secret locations, always in a hurry, always looking over their shoulders. Amara was beginning to realize that this wasn't going to be a simple search. It was dangerous, and it had only just begun. It was late one evening when they met again. Amara was sitting in a small, dimly lit diner on the outskirts of the city, waiting nervously. She had never been in a situation like this before. This feeling of being watched, of being part of something bigger than herself, something dark and dangerous. Captain Miller arrived, his face grim. He slid into the booth across from her, his eyes scanning the room before he settled into his seat. We've got a lead, he said, his voice low. Amara's heart skipped a beat. What kind of lead? Remember the organization your mother was working with? He asked. The one she was gathering evidence against. I found some old files, ones that mention her. And someone who might know where she is. Amara leaned in, her curiosity piqued. Who? Captain Miller paused for a moment, then leaned closer to her. A man named Victor Klein. He was one of the people involved in the operation your mother was exposing. I've been tracking him for a while, but he's been very careful, very secretive. I believe he knows something about your mother's disappearance, but getting to him won't be easy. He's powerful. Amara's stomach tightened. She had heard of Victor Klein before. He was a name whispered in the halls of power, a shadowy figure who seemed to always be just out of reach. People said he was involved in illegal arms deals, political corruption, and even human trafficking. If her mother had been exposing him, it was no wonder she had disappeared. Do you think he'll talk? Amara asked, her voice trembling. I don't know, Captain Miller replied, but we have to try. If he knows anything, he's the key to finding your mother. And if we can get close enough to him, we might learn the truth about what really happened that day. The crash, the disappearance, everything. Amara nodded, her mind racing. This was bigger than she had ever imagined. She had thought she was just going to find her mother, but now she was part of something dangerous, something that could put both her and Captain Miller in harm's way. We can't just walk up to him, she said, her voice firm. We need a plan. Captain Miller smiled slightly, a glimmer of admiration in his eyes. You're right, this isn't something we can rush. I've been doing some digging, and I think we can get to Klein through one of his associates, a woman named Elena Duval. She's his right-hand person, and she's been seen with him a lot. If we can get close to her, we might be able to find a way to get to him. Amara's mind was already working. She had no experience with this kind of thing, but the thought of finding her mother, of learning the truth, was enough to keep her focused. She had to do this. What do we need to do? She asked. We need to get into the circles that Elena Duval moves in, Captain Miller said. She's known to frequent high-profile events, gala dinners, fundraisers, charity events. It's not going to be easy to get in, but I've got a contact who can help us. We'll get you in there. And once you're close to Elena, you can get the information we need. Amara's pulse quickened. She was nervous, but something inside her told her that this was the only way. If she wanted answers about her mother, she had to take risks. Okay, she said, her voice steady despite the anxiety churning inside her. I'm ready. Let's do it. The following days were filled with preparation. Amara had to get a new wardrobe, something sleek and sophisticated to blend in with the high society crowd she would soon be entering. She practiced speaking in a more confident tone, even though it felt unnatural. She had to be someone else, someone who could fit in with Elena Duval's world. Captain Miller's contact was a woman named Sophie, an old friend of his who worked in the security industry. Sophie helped them plan their entrance into one of the biggest charity galas of the season. Amara felt out of place in the glittering gown Sophie had picked for her, but she knew she had no choice. This was their only shot. The night of the gala arrived. Amara stood in front of a mirror, adjusting her dress one last time. Her reflection stared back at her, someone she barely recognized. But beneath the nerves and the layers of doubt, she knew this was the right thing to do. When she entered the gala, the grandeur of the event took her breath away. People in tuxedos and evening gowns sipped champagne and exchanged pleasantries. The lights were bright, the air thick with the smell of expensive perfume and the sound of laughter. But Amara wasn't here to enjoy herself. She was here for answers. She spotted Elena Duval almost immediately. The woman was impossible to miss, standing with a small group of people, her posture commanding and her smile as cold as ice. She was everything Amara wasn't. Confident, powerful, dangerous. Amara's heart raced. She had to get close to Elena, had to find a way to speak with her without raising suspicion. She could feel the weight of the plan pressing down on her, but she pushed it aside. She had a job to do. As she made her way across the room, a sense of urgency filled her chest. This wasn't just about finding her mother anymore. This was about taking down a dangerous operation, one that had taken everything from her. and she wasn't going to back down. Amara's heart raced as she moved through the sea of glittering faces at the gala. The sounds of laughter and clinking glasses filled the air, but she barely heard them. Her mind was focused solely on the task at hand. She had to get close to Elena Duval, the woman who could lead her to Victor Klein, and possibly to the truth about her mother's disappearance. Her nerves were on edge, but Amara pushed forward, walking with purpose, her heels clicking softly on the marble floor. She could see Elena standing across the room, surrounded by a small group of wealthy-looking men and women. The light bounced off Elena's perfectly styled hair and the shimmering dress she wore. There was an aura of power about her, an aura that made Amara feel small in comparison. But she wasn't going to let that stop her. Amara glanced around the room, making sure no one was watching too closely. She couldn't afford to draw attention to herself. Not yet, at least. Her plan was simple: get close enough to overhear something, or even better, to strike up a conversation with Elena. She needed information, and if there was one thing she had learned from Captain Miller, it was that people like Elena didn't trust easily. She couldn't rush this. Amara took a deep breath and moved toward the bar, pretending to study the drink menu. She could feel her palms sweating, but she kept her composure, keeping her eyes on Elena from across the room. She wasn't sure how she was going to approach her yet, but she had to find a way in. Her chance came when one of the men in Elena's group excused himself and walked to the bathroom. Elena was now alone for a moment, and Amara's heart skipped a beat. This was it, her window of opportunity. She straightened her posture and walked toward Elena, making sure her steps were confident, even though her insides were churning with anxiety. As she approached, Elena turned slightly, as if sensing her presence. "Excuse me, Miss Duval." Amara's voice was steady, though she could feel the tremor in her stomach. Elena's eyes flicked up, her gaze calculating as she took in Amara's appearance. Amara knew she must look out of place, but she forced a smile, determined to make this work. "Yes," Elena replied, her tone polite but with a hint of skepticism. "Can I help you?" "I'm sorry to interrupt," Amara began, carefully choosing her words, "but I couldn't help but notice how incredible your work is. I've heard so much about you, your business dealings, the charities you support. It's all very impressive." Elena raised an eyebrow, clearly intrigued but still cautious. "I see. Well, thank you. I'm not sure I'm used to strangers complimenting me like that, but I appreciate the kind words." Amara kept her smile in place, though her heart pounded harder in her chest. She was walking a fine line, and she had to stay focused. "I'm actually new to the city," she continued, trying to sound casual. "I'm hoping to make a name for myself in the business world, like you. Maybe you could offer some advice. I'd be honored to hear your thoughts on how you got started." For a moment, Elena looked at her with suspicion, as if weighing her words. Then, to Amara's surprise, she smiled, a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Advice, huh? You certainly came to the right place," Elena said, her voice now more relaxed. "Well, the key to success in this world is knowing who to trust, and more importantly, who not to trust. People can be very unreliable." Amara nodded, her mind racing. She had to tread carefully. She needed to steer the conversation in the direction of Victor Klein without sounding too obvious. "That's interesting," Amara said, her voice calm. "I've heard rumors, actually, about someone you work with, a man named Victor Klein. Is he as trustworthy as you, I wonder?" Elena's eyes hardened in an instant, the smile slipping from her face. Amara's stomach dropped. She had pushed too far, too fast. But it was too late to back out now. "What do you know about Victor Klein?" Elena asked sharply, her tone no longer friendly. Amara held her ground. "I've heard a lot of things. Some say he's very powerful. Others say he's involved in dangerous business. I'm just curious. I don't mean to overstep, but I think there's more to him than what people see on the surface." Elena studied her for a long moment. For a second, Amara thought she might blow her cover, But then Alina leaned in slightly, her voice quieter. Victor Klein is a business partner, Alina said slowly, as though carefully choosing her words. And I've worked with him for years. You're right about one thing. He's powerful. But not in the way you might think. The things he does, they're not for the faint of heart. And if you're smart, you won't go looking for him. Some things are better left alone. Amara's heart beat faster. She had just struck a nerve, but she couldn't back down now. But why? Why are people so afraid of him? What is he really involved in? Alina's gaze turned cold, her eyes narrowing. She stood up abruptly, straightening her posture. I don't have time for this, she said, her voice now icy. You should leave before you get yourself into something you don't understand. Amara felt the tension in the air thicken. Alina was no longer pretending to be friendly. She had pushed her too far. But she couldn't back down. She had come too far to let this opportunity slip away. I just want to know the truth, Amara said, her voice steady despite the fear bubbling in her chest. About Victor Klein. About my mother. What really happened? Alina paused for a moment, and for the briefest second, Amara saw something in her eyes, something almost like regret. Then, in an instant, it was gone, replaced by an unreadable mask. I suggest you leave now, Alina said coldly, before things get complicated. Amara took a step back, her mind racing. She had gotten closer than she had ever expected. But she was also dangerously close to crossing a line she couldn't come back from. Alina was clearly hiding something, and Amara could feel it in her bones. But she also knew that this encounter wasn't over. It had only just begun. As she turned and walked away, her thoughts were jumbled. But one thing was clear. She was closer to the truth now than ever before. But at what cost? The next morning, Amara woke up to a feeling of dread hanging over her. Her encounter with Alina had left her with more questions than answers. The brief exchange, though filled with tension, had revealed something crucial. Alina was hiding something. But what? And more importantly, why had she reacted the way she did when Amara mentioned Victor Klein? The gala felt like a distant memory, but the thoughts of what Alina had said kept replaying in Amara's mind. Some things are better left alone. What did that mean? Was her mother's disappearance part of something far bigger and darker than she had realized? And where did Victor Klein fit into all of this? Captain Miller had told her that Victor Klein was dangerous, but now Amara understood the gravity of the situation. Alina had all but confirmed it. The threads of truth were beginning to unravel, but they were tangled up in lies and secrets. Amara knew she had to find a way to get closer to Victor Klein. The only way to truly uncover the truth about her mother was to face the man who might hold all the answers. But how? After the gala, she had no more leads. Alina had shut her down, and Captain Miller had warned her not to push too hard. Yet, Amara couldn't stop now. She had to keep going. The day after the gala, she met with Captain Miller in a small cafe on the edge of town, their usual meeting spot. He was already waiting when she arrived, his face serious as he looked up at her. I take it things didn't go well with Alina, he said, his voice low and steady. Amara sat down across from him, her hands trembling slightly. She had never felt more uncertain, more afraid, than she did now. But she couldn't turn back. Not after everything she had learned. No, she said, her voice tight. She shut me down immediately when I mentioned Victor Klein. But there's something more. She seemed scared. She's hiding something. I could see it in her eyes. She knows more than she's letting on. Captain Miller nodded slowly, taking in her words. I figured as much. Alina Duval is one of Klein's closest associates. She's not someone you can easily get to. But her reaction tells me we're on the right track. Amara leaned forward, her mind racing. What do we do now? How do we get to Klein? Captain Miller's gaze darkened. We have to play it smart. Klein is dangerous. If we go after him directly, we might end up in more trouble than we're prepared for. But if we can get to his people, someone close to him, we might be able to find out where he's hiding. Amara clenched her fists, frustration building inside her. She was so close, yet it felt like the truth was always just out of reach. She couldn't stand it. She had to know what happened to her mother, and she had to find out soon. "Do you have any idea who might know where he is?" Amara asked, trying to keep her voice calm. Captain Miller's eyes flickered, as if considering his options. After a moment, he spoke. "There's a man named Robert Hill. He used to work for Klein, but he left the organization years ago. He's living off the grid now, but I've been tracking him. If we can find him, he might know where Klein is hiding. He might know what happened to your mother." Amara's heart skipped a beat. Where is he now? Captain Miller leaned back, tapping his fingers on the table as he thought. "I've got a location for him, but it's not going to be easy to get to him. He's paranoid. He's got people watching him. If we make one wrong move, we might scare him off." Amara didn't hesitate. "I don't care. We need to find him. I need to know what happened to my mother." Captain Miller looked at her with a mixture of respect and concern. "I know you're determined, but we can't rush this. We have to be careful. If Hill knows where Klein is, we need him alive. We can't afford to lose him." Amara nodded, her resolve hardening. She wasn't going to let fear stop her. She had already come too far to back down now. "We'll find him," she said, her voice firm. The next few days were spent tracking Robert Hill. Captain Miller used his connections to gather information, and soon they had a lead. Hill was living in a remote cabin in the woods, far from the prying eyes of the city. It was the perfect hiding spot for someone who didn't want to be found. But Amara was determined to find him. Captain Miller arranged for a discreet meeting with one of his contacts, a former private investigator who had experience in locating people who didn't want to be found. The contact, a woman named Rachel, had been tracking Hill for weeks, and she agreed to meet with them to discuss their next move. Rachel was a tough woman, with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense attitude. She briefed Amara and Captain Miller on the details of Hill's hideout. The cabin was isolated, surrounded by thick forest. There were no other houses for miles. Hill had gone off the grid, but he wasn't completely alone. He had a few trusted associates who came and went, and they had to be careful not to alert him. Amara's heart raced as she listened to Rachel's briefing. She knew the risks, but she was willing to take them. This was her last chance to find the answers she so desperately needed. "We'll have to move quickly," Rachel said. "Once we get to Hill's cabin, we need to be in and out fast. No mistakes. He's not someone who will give up information easily." Amara nodded, her mind already focused on the task at hand. She wasn't going to let anything stop her now. Later that night, they made their way through the woods, the darkness surrounding them like a thick blanket. The air was cold, the sound of their footsteps muffled by the forest floor. Amara's nerves were on edge, but she kept her thoughts focused. She couldn't afford to think about the dangers of what they were doing. She had to focus on Hill, on the truth. As they approached the cabin, Amara's heart began to race. This was it, the moment she had been waiting for. The answers were within reach. Captain Miller motioned for them to stop, and they crouched low, watching the cabin from the shadows. There were no lights inside, but they could see movement through the window. Hill was there. This was the moment of truth. The night air was thick with tension as Amara crouched in the shadows, the soft rustle of leaves beneath her feet the only sound she could hear. The cabin before her seemed still, almost lifeless. But Amara knew better. Robert Hill was inside. He was the key to everything she had been searching for, the key to understanding what had happened to her mother. And tonight, she was going to get the truth, no matter what it took. Captain Miller stood next to her, his expression stern and focused. Rachel, the private investigator, was already moving silently, her steps barely making a sound as she navigated the forest around them. Amara could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on her chest. Every second that passed felt like an eternity. They had come too far to back up now. They had to confront Hill, and they had to do it quickly. "We get in, we get the information, "And we get out," Captain Miller whispered. His voice was calm, but there was a steel edge to it. "No mistakes." Amara nodded, her heart hammering in her chest. She wasn't afraid of Robert Hill, but she was afraid of what he might know. The pieces of the puzzle were coming together, and Amara could feel the storm building inside her. Her mother's disappearance, Victor Klein's involvement, and Alina's cryptic warnings were all part of the same tangled mess. If Hill knew where Klein was, it would change everything. But it also meant that she was one step closer to finding the truth, or risking everything to uncover it. They moved swiftly, staying low and blending into the darkness. The cabin loomed in front of them, its weathered wooden walls barely visible in the dim light of the moon. There were no lights on inside, no signs of movement. But Amara knew better than to trust appearances. Hill had to be there. They reached the cabin's back door, and Captain Miller signaled for Rachel to lead the way. She expertly picked the lock in seconds, the door creaking open quietly. They slipped inside, the air inside cold and musty. The faint smell of old wood and stale tobacco filled Amara's nose as they moved deeper into the cabin. The faint sound of footsteps above them made Amara freeze. Hill was upstairs. They had to move fast. Captain Miller gestured for Rachel and Amara to follow him up the stairs, and they ascended silently, each step careful and deliberate. The upstairs was dim, the only light coming from the faint glow of a small oil lamp on a table. Amara could see a door at the end of the hallway, slightly ajar. She knew that was where Hill was. Rachel held up her hand, signaling for them to stop. She listened intently, her eyes narrowing. There was a low murmur coming from the other side of the door. Hill was talking to someone. Amara's heart skipped a beat. Could this be the moment she finally got the answers she'd been looking for? Rachel motioned to Captain Miller, who nodded in agreement. Without a word, he slowly pushed open the door. The room was small but cozy, with a single bed covered in thick blankets, a wooden chair in the corner, and a table cluttered with papers and empty glasses. Hill was sitting at the table, his back to them, speaking quietly to a man Amara didn't recognize. Amara's pulse quickened. She had to hear what they were saying. She had to know what Hill knew about Klein and her mother. Rachel stepped forward, but Captain Miller held her back. He wasn't sure whether Hill's companion was someone they could trust, or someone who could make their job even more dangerous. Amara could barely control her breath. She had come too far to turn back now. Her mind raced with thoughts of her mother, the mystery surrounding her disappearance, and Victor Klein's involvement. She had to know everything. Suddenly, Hill's voice broke through her thoughts. "We can't let her find out," he said sharply, his tone low and urgent. "If she gets too close, Klein will kill us both. He doesn't care who gets in the way." The words hit Amara like a slap. Klein will kill us both. Her breath caught in her throat. Was this about her mother? Was Klein involved in her disappearance? Hill's companion responded, his voice almost a whisper. "We'll take care of it. But the girl, she's relentless. She won't stop until she finds the truth. We need to deal with her before she becomes a problem." A cold chill ran down Amara's spine. The girl. They were talking about her. What truth? Hill's voice wavered slightly. What if she knows more than we think? What if? "You're being paranoid, Robert," the man interrupted, his voice dripping with disdain. "She's just a child. She's no threat to Klein." Amara's blood ran cold. The man had called her just a child. To them, she was nothing. But to herself, she was everything. Her mother's disappearance, the lies she had been told her entire life. It all had to be tied together. There had to be a reason why Klein was so determined to keep the truth from her. And now, Hill's words confirmed it. Amara's hand clenched into a fist, her knuckles white. She couldn't let them get away with this. She had to act. Now. With a sudden burst of energy, she pushed open the door, stepping into the room. Hill and the stranger froze, their eyes wide with shock. For a moment, no one moved. Then Hill stood, his face turning pale as he saw who had entered. "I told you she wouldn't stop," the man muttered, his eyes narrowing. "We need to move. Now." Captain Miller and Rachel appeared in the doorway behind Amara, their expressions unreadable. They had her back. But the truth was now closer than ever. The danger was real. And everything she had worked for, everything she had hoped for, was riding on this moment. Amara took a step forward, her voice shaking with both anger and determination. "Tell me what happened to my mother. Tell me about Victor Klein. I know you know. I need to know the truth." Hild's face twisted with fear, but he didn't say anything. The stranger moved toward the window, his hand sliding down to his waistband. Amara could see it, a glint of metal in the dim light. But it was too late. They had already crossed the line. They were in too deep. "You're making a mistake," Hild said quietly, his voice low but laced with desperation. "Klein will come for you. He will come for all of us." Amara didn't flinch. This was her fight now, and she was going to finish it.